we move onwards and upwards, we are actually, there's just like a couple of words on Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. So that's why I did send that that page, that Amud 2, because last week we were looking at the first Beis Hamikdash. Now we're moving towards the second Beis. It's all linked to the Mishnah that we had about the various Gezeirus enactments that came through at the time of the Churban Beis Hamikdash, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was in the position as the Nasi. So that's really what we're looking at today, which is Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, the last line of the Amud. Okay, Ukenegdon, corresponding to the move with the first Beis Hamikdash and the Shechina moving further and further away. We've got an interesting, got Martin Julius, yeah. Kenegdon, as we say, corresponding to that number 10. So we find so often the number 10 that you find throughout davening, lots of places. Keep your eye open for the number 10 appearing everywhere. Shleimus. We've got it. Oh, Martin, good to see you. We're at the last line of Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, and we're talking about the 10 moves of the Sanhedrin. That's the Sanhedrin Hagodol, 71 members. How they moved 10 places. Of course, that was a rather different situation. It was the persecution, the Roman persecution, going really, as we say, from pillar to post. We mentioned before Mikaper Esamasois. Have a look just before we start. It's the Rashi on the outside, as we say, playing on the outside as well as the inside on Daf Lamed Aleph. Laurie, good to see you. The first or the last wide line, that's 4 lines down in Rashi. Let's just get a picture where we're up to. Esamasois, these are the 10 moves. Mishum da'iri masnisen, as we mentioned. Have you got it? The right on top there, on the left-hand side, the 5th line down. It's the first narrow line. Mishum da'iri masnisen. The Mishnah was speaking about the decrees of Takonos shel Yavne, Nokat lo hachalameima sheshom golso Sanhedrin. What's Yavne got to do with anything? We always think of Yerushalayim. We talk about the Lishkas Hagozis, which was the chamber of the hewn, the stones that we hewn. We've got Lishkas Hagozis. What's Yavne got to do with anything? Very nice. Those people who are familiar with Yavne, nice place. But what's it doing here in our Mishnah? So says Rashi, Takonoshi Yavne Nokad Lohoch Lamema to tell us, Sheshom Golso Sanhedrin Bimei Rabbi Yochanan. They were there because that was the place they were exiled to at the time of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Golus Rishono Shegolu Mishran, the first exile, the first move out of Yerushalayim. Goes to Yavne, and we're going to pick that up now as we look at the last line of the Gemara again. So Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, right at the end. Ukenegdon Golso Sanhedrin. Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, last line. The Sanhedrin, as I say, corresponding to the move at the time of the first Beis Hamikdash. Similar, there are 10 moves of the Sanhedrin. Mi Gemara, this is learned out from the Gemara. With, of course, there are no psukim. We're talking about the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. And let's have a look where they're going from. So the first one was Milishkas Hagozis Lochonus. Now, Lochonus sounds a bit like a chanut with a shop, but it means a chamber that they were further distance from the complex of the Beis Hamikdash, still in Yerushalayim, but on outside. Have a look at Rashi, please. Now we're right at the bottom of the Amud, about 6 lines up. Milishkas Hagozis, actually notice the gears of the text that Rashi has, Lechanuyos, like shopping center, not quite, but it's Chanuyot in Yerushalayim, in the old city. They set up places where particularly the Sanhedrin Agodol was sitting. Why did they move? Now, this is an interesting one. Have a look at Rashi. Chanuyos, and Rashi clearly has the text Chanuyos, like shops or places, homes. Osu lohem bahar habayis, in the Holy Mountain, Temple Mount. The Yoshvu Shom, rather than the place they were in initially, which was what they call the Lishkas Hagozis, closer to the real Temple Mount. Yoshvu Shom lo mashelo donu dinei nefoshes. They were no longer judging capital offenses. Why? And the ruling is that as long as there is the Beis Din Hagadol, the largest of all the Beis Din that sat in Yerushalayim, it sat in this lishka, in this chamber. As long as they're effective, when I say effective, I mean in effect, they're working, they're sitting there, they're judging there, then other courts around the country could also paskin capital offenses. Wow. However, says Rashi, the chozu they saw, sadly, the nefishe rotzchin, an abundance of murderers, could omrinon in Sanhedrin of Mem Aleph. V'chol hanach, full stop. So they moved out of the Lishkas Hagozis, a statement saying we are no longer paskening capital offenses. Sadly, the murder rate was much higher, and they said we will not pasken this any longer. And that meant beyond the large Beis Din, smaller Bota Dinim sitting around the country also could not pasken. So they're moving. This is the first move. Why was that? Of course, as I say, a lot more murder was more common. And that was the first move out of the complex of the Beis Hamikdash to these Chanuyot, or as we've got the word Chonus, there was just one. Continues Rashi, V'chol hanuch goluyos to Sanhedrin debais sheni ka'omar. Just to mention the point that we've said already, all these moves at the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, umasois de shchina b'bais rishon ka'omar, where we were talking last week about the shchina itself moving from place to place. We are now talking about the Sanhedrin moving from one place to another. Now, that wasn't because of persecution, but later ones were, as we'll see. So the bottom line again, so Sanhedrin goes from the Lishkas Hagozis, this chamber, to Chonus or Chonuyos. That's the first move. Second move, Mechonus Lirushalayim. Now, what it means, Yerushalayim here, means be in the city of Yerushalayim, but not in the temple complex. Okay? They're moving further away. Yerushalayim leyavne. That's clearly at the time of the Churban Abayis. Interesting, the earlier one was before the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Already then they stopped having dinim, judging. There were no further court cases of capital offenses. That was prior to the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. Now we've moved to Yerushalayim, going to Yavne at the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. As we turn the page, gentlemen, we're now on to Lamed Aleph, Omid Base. Mi Yavna, they're going a little bit further out to a place called Usha. Okay. And then
Norman.
Yes.
Norman, sorry to disturb you. There's quite a lot of background sound coming from
my place.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to close the door or something.
Yes, hold on a minute.
Tinoika shall base Rabon.
Oh, yeah, they're cleaning up here wonderfully well. Yes.
Tinoika shall base, not cleaning.
Well, if there are any comments, of course, about the share, by all means, come forward. So that's all. That's perfectly in order. But okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. Have a look at Rashi. But actually, before we do that, let's just go through the list, and then we'll have a look at this Rashi here. Miyavna, they're going to Usha. Usha, when things seem to calm down a bit, they go back to Yavna. Then they go back to Usha again, and from Usha they go to Shephorim, and Shephorim to Beis Sha'orim to Tzipuri. People may be familiar with Tzipuri. I think that even now it might be actually on the map. Tzipuri, actually, it's mentioned there from the word Tzipur. It's very high up, like the flying birds. It's very high up and very apparently wonderful. The climate there is much better, especially for Cholim, as we'll see in a minute.
It's a remarkable place, and it's got mosaics which are unrivaled, I think, anywhere. Really? And it's got ruins there which are well worth Tzipori.
We have been there years ago.
Shpa'am is also a place which I think is now used a lot.
Yes, in Tzipori, I think it is. It's very high up as well, isn't it, Tzipori?
Very high up. It's got lovely views from there. It's
lovely views, but the weather's meant to be fine. Well, I say the climate very good for, as I say, we'll see a Cholim. So Rabbi Yehuda Nossi himself went there when he was unwell, and from there they went to Tveria, and that was the final stop. And it's Tveria. Now it says here Amuko Mikulon, lowest. Now it doesn't mean location-wise. It means that was the lowest the lowest level of Klal Yisrael. That was like the final stop. But before we pick that up with this posuk, let's have a look, please, at this Rashi. So Rashi says, Kshahoya Hanosi. That's very important, you see. Where the prince, the Nossi, door, where he resided, Bo, and if you look at the Bach, it should say Bo Hoyasa, leave out the word keep it, Bo Hoyasa Sanhedrin Imai. Normally he took the Sanhedrin with him. In fact, there were quite a few rules that applied for the Nossi, and so you want the Nossi to be very close to the Sanhedrin, and that so the Sanhedrin would normally go with him. It was all together. Ukashemistalik who Obano, whether he went or indeed his son, and in most instances it was really father son as progressing down the Nesiim. L'mokamacher, if they went in exile. In some instances, it was really because of the persecution. Hayeshgola, Hayeshi or Golo, Hayeshiva Achrob, the yeshiva went together with him, and says Rashi, continuing on the places, Yavna bimei Rabbi Yochanan. Yes, we've spoken about Yavna. In fact, our Mishnah, the previous Mishnah, spoke about in Yavna. Remember, they had the rules about Yavna blowing the shofar on Shabbos, and that was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Usha was at the time of Rabban Gamliel. Okay, notice the title Rabban. He was the prince of Klal Yisrael. V'chozru mei Usha leyavne. When things seem to be getting a little bit easier, going back to Yavne, not going back to Yerushalayim, mind, but going back to Yavne. Ubi Meiram Shimon Beno. Worth remembering, there are two Rabban Gamliels and two Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliels. One of them, sadly, was at the time of the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. One of them we talk about in Eile Ezkara, We talk about Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. This is the second one. So in the time of Rabbi Shimon Beno, Chosru, they returned. I've got again the word Le'usha, again going back to Usha. Kedesanya Lekamon Bepirikin, as we'll find actually on the very next Omud, where there's a reference that they're about Yavne, about Usha, and about this return. Ukeshekitshu Bezdin, as the Gemara later on will recount, as I say, it's Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. It's talking there about what they used to do in the olden days. Yavne, Usha, very interesting Gemara there about how they would actually daven, because once we get to Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, it really is very much about the davening of Rosh Hashanah, the Tekiyos of Rosh Hashanah, and there you'll find some instances where they say what used to happen. I remember in my father's place what it was like, and basically challenging the minhag at the time, and that's for Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. So again, we've got this move from one place to another. Continue Rashi, Beis Sha'orim. Now I'm not sure, Simon, you know anything about Beis Sha'orim? Beit Sha'arim? No, I don't know much about it. But anyway, Rashi here tells us that Beit Sha'arim, Beit Sha'arim, Tzipore, Tiberia, all of those were at the time of Rebbe. So Rebbe really on the move. Could Omrinon, the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Achre Rebbe lebeis Sha'orim. They were following Rebbe to, or the ruling follows Rebbe's psak in Beis Sha'orim. That's where he was. V'shuv, sadly.
Beis Sha'orim, there's actually a national park there at the moment, and that's slightly southeast of Haifa. Slightly southeast of Haifa, near Daliat El Carmel. So it's near Yokneam. That's another area. Okay, so it's
further north. Thank you. V'shuv kshechola, when he became ill, this is the point we mentioned before, Rebbe became ill, holichuhu l'tzipori. They took him to Tzipori, as I said, we said the climate there, etc. Excellent. Could Omin, and the Gemara says Exubus, that when he became unwell, they went with him to Tzipori. Upteveria, again, Rebbe sounds like he got a cure from and then moved to Tiberia, and that was at the time of Antoninus. Remember, he had very good relationship himself and Antoninus. Things got a lot better then. Of course, that was amazing time because it allowed him, because things were much more settled, quiet, and calm. It allowed him to, as we've got the redaction of all the whole of the Gemara, and that's Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, who's pulling together these Mishnayos, and of course that was at a time where things were a little bit calmer, and as I say, he had very good relationship with Antoninus, which helped.
Can I ask, so all these movements, were they, I mean, what was driving one to, I know the original one to Yavne was because that was negotiated between the Romans and
yes.
But
yes.
what were there sort of historical events that?
It's interesting.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's not all because of persecution. At different reasons. As we saw, the very first one, it was just to move out of the Lishkas Bay, as we said, and we see from Rebbe as well. Rebbe's on the move. He's not well, so he's just moving from place to place. So it's not necessarily, if you say negative as it was previously, but and the final piece is, as we've seen here, have a look at the Gemara now. So in answer to your question, various reasons. It's not always persecution. Many of times it is, where they're going backwards and forwards and things are getting a little bit easier. But you can see the final ones where with Tiberia, he was in very good terms with Antoninus. Nevertheless, the level of Klal Yisrael at that time seems to be at its lowest. Back to the Gemara, because we've got this Uteveria Amuka Mikulam. What does it mean by Amuka? We're talking about the depths. Have a look at Rashi. Shefelim Hayu Oz. They were at a low level. Shofel at a low level. Mikol Hamasoy Shegolu. From all the places they went to, the time at Tiberia, they were at, they say, the lowest level, the lowest spiritual level. And there's a posuk for that. Says Rashi, says the Gemara. Here we are. This posuk I've got round the side. You may have it as well. A posuk from Yeshaya. And the posuk there is telling us, obviously, a nevuah of Yeshaya, v'shofalt. From the word shofal, you will eventually drop down. That's like a comma. May eretz tedaberi. You'll be speaking from the ground. And the posuk continues, and how they'll be so downtrodden. The speech as well, that I've got the whole posuk here, you have too. He's got the whole posuk. They're talking about ad ofor, till the ground. We'll come back to this posuk in a moment. The posuk saying me offer im roseich to tzafseif. Yes, and that reference is to the time of Tiberia. They were at this, say, the very low level, although of course they're in Tiberia, which is actually up north. Interesting, the Gemara now says that in fact, out of those 10, some of them we can reduce. Rab Loza Omer, Sheish Goluyos. In fact, there are just 6. The Meforshim explained that, you remember, going backwards and forwards, really only counting as 1. And in fact, all the traveling of Rebbe Yehuda Nossi also only counting of 1. And therefore you end up with just 6. Have a look at Rashi. No, we haven't got the Rashi yet. We haven't done the Posuk. 6 steps, sadly, downwards. Shenema, here's the Posuk. Another posuk in Yeshaya, and we'll see here, it says, Ki Heishach Yoshvei Morim. Heishach, the word Hishtachah there, bowing down, but it can be interesting how often it's used very positively, bowing down. Korim Umishtachavim, here you've got Ki Heishach, bringing down, notice the hifil, Heishach Yoshvei Morim, bringing down those living high, yeah. Kirio Niskova, they were in this exalted city. Yashpileno, he has brought them, lowered them really. Again, seems like a repetition. Yashpilo, again, another word of lowering, coming down. Could be he's talking about the city here. Yoshvi Morim Kiryah, this word Kiryah, representing Klal Yisrael. Yashpilo ad, bringing them right down, ad eretz, to the ground. Another word coming through, Yagi Eno, reaching ad ofor, to the dust. Have a look at Rashi. Sheish Goluyos, the word Heishach is 1, says Rashi, Choda. Yashpileno, we've got the word Heishach. What's Yashpileno? Bringing it down further. Trey is Yashpila. And then there's another one. Sorry, Yashpila is Talas. The word mentioned again in the Pasuk. Ad Oretz, or the Ad Eretz, until the ground. That's 4. Yagiena, causing it to reach, is 5. ad offer to the ground again, to the earth. Sheish, domodsim lamema. Why we've got all these extra words? Of course, that could have all been said in a much shortened form. Yashpileno ad eretz offer. Why these extra words to tell us there are like these 6 stops, 6 major stops, and there we're talking about reflected very much, therefore, and corresponding to the level. Now, it's true, as we mentioned before, the reason why they may have been moving were reasons, could be for health or anything else, but it's representing also, as we see in this pasuk, the Gemara is telling us here, there were 6 levels of Klal Yisrael as they are descending further, and that is the final stop. However, as we mentioned last week, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Umishom Asidim Ligoel. From there doesn't mean from to vary, it means from that level, from the depths, spiritual depths, we will eventually rise. As we mentioned last week, Shenema, the pasuk, back to L'chododi. Well, of course, L'chododi taken from these words. Hisnari may offer. Hisnari, Lenaer is shaking. Hisnari, shake yourself off. May offer from this, the dust here. Kumi, arise. Shavi, sit. Yerushalayim. So we do find, as we mentioned here last time, finishing on a higher note, something positive as we conclude, as we always like to, on all instances where we're talking about Klal Yisrael dropping to levels negatively, but then finish on a high, hopefully through tefillah, we say teshuvah, etc. Looking forward to a rise, shaking off the dust, and onwards, literally onwards and upwards. And that takes us to the end of that Mishnah. Okay, very good indeed. Says the Gemara, our next Mishnah. Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha. As we've been speaking, and in fact the Gemara will give us a few more enactments and rulings of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. In fact, as we go through this, we'll see the Zuva. Guess what number of enactments there are? The wonderful number 10, which the Gemara will deal with a little bit later on. Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha. Va'od zos. Furthermore, something else. Hiskin Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted something else. And again, these institutions, you'd have to say it's linked to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. It became more difficult to be able to get to Yerushalayim or even to Yavne. Traveling was difficult. We've mentioned that point before. And therefore, there were certain leniencies which came through. And here's another one. Sha'afilu Rosh Bezdin b'chol mokem. Even if the Rosh Bezdin, the head of the Bezdin, remember you've got the Nasi, you've got the Rosh Bezdin, even if the Rosh Bezdin was where b'chol mokem, in any place, shelo yeheyu edim holchim ela lomokem vad. Normally, as we'll see in Rashi, the Gemara, normally back to announcing the Eidim coming, saying they've seen the new moon, they would have to come to, they were originally Yerushalayim, but they would come and you'd want the Rosh Bezdin to be there. Remember back to the Pasuk in Shemos Yud Beis, remember the Hashem said to Moshe and Aaron, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem Rosh Chodoshim. It's got to be announced in front of the elite, and particularly we're talking about the Rosh Bezdin, Moshe Rabbeinu. That's where you really should be announcing, and that's where the Mekudesh that we saw in the previous parak. So, Shelo Yoedim Holchem Ela Lomokem Vad. No, they come to this place of assembly, but even if it turned out the Rosh Bezdin wasn't there, he may have been called on business, may have been called in to see the emperor or whatever, the heads. If he wasn't there, they wouldn't have to try and follow him. They wouldn't have to wait, obviously, you wouldn't say wait for him to come back, because otherwise they're losing valuable time if you want to announce the Rosh Chodesh. But you could have said you'd have to move on, even if he'd moved, hopefully with enough people. But that's not necessary. In the decree of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, there was again a further leniency. You just roll up to the place of the assembly where the Bezdin Agol should be, whether or not the Rosh Bezdin is there. You don't have to run after and try and find him. You come there and they send you off somewhere else. That was not necessary. Have a look at the Rashi on the Mishnah. Om Rabbi Shuvin Kocha. Afilu Rosh Bezdin b'chol moko. Says Rashi, shenitzrach lifrosh mimokam avad. He needed to be poresh. That means he needed to separate himself. Maybe he was called lomokam acher elsewhere. Sheharei Ika hachodesh tuluya boy. In the main, it does depend on him. He really should be there to make this announcement. Kudasnan, as we've seen going back a while, Bepirikin de Le'el, Rosh Bezdin Omer Makudesh. Remember, it was the Rosh Bezdin announcing Makudesh sanctified the moon. V'yalfina Mikroy learned from Psukim, but obviously, what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is saying is, although that's preferable to have the Rosh Bezdin there, if he can't be there, it doesn't matter. Continue Rashi, please. Lo Yehud Tzrichim Eid Achodesh Lahalech Achro. He doesn't have to follow them, assuming he's gone with a few of his Dayanim. You do not have to follow the Rosh Bezdin. Elo L'Mokam Havad. You go to the place of assembly, Shel Yeshiva, where they're sitting, the assembled people. Yelchu, the Sanhedrin Yekadshu below Rosh Bezdin. They would announce it even without the Rosh Bezdin there, and the Gemara will explain why as we look at the bit of a case study here. Okay,
it's interesting. It's been like the circuit judges, isn't it? They used to have to go. Presumably, the Rosh Bezdin was traveling around the country for to Paskin Shines.
Or I mean, it may have been called, as we said, on business as well. The business may have been to
they may have had judges' houses or Rosh Bezdin houses.
Rosh Bezdin, yeah. Or I say it may have been called, say, from whoever. Say even in the time of the Romans, he may have been called there, whatever, and needed, and therefore he wouldn't be at the place where you'd expect. So then, rather than say, "Oh, you better dash off to find him,"
called for what? Called for what? So I didn't catch that.
I beg your pardon?
You said he may have been called
discussing, but this, I don't know, the situation with the Jews, etc. It may have been called
with the government, with the
various governors. He may have been called. Yeah, but you're right. Otherwise, he could be, going around the country. But it sounds like he wasn't that far, because otherwise it would have been impossible to catch him if they want to be Mekadosh the Chodesh anyway. But whatever it is, they made the ruling, as we'll see, to ensure that people would come. And you'll see in the Gemara, the main reason is we don't want to put people off. They say, "Oh, well, I got to Yerushalayim," and then they told me, "Oh, well, I'm afraid he's actually, he's gone actually, start going, getting another, well, it won't be a taxi, get another wagon to go and try and go off to him." No, it's to make things easier, to try and, as we've always said at this point, it becomes we try to make things as easy as possible for the Eidim to come and make sure that they would come on other occasions. Otherwise, they'll say, "Oh, well, I went last time, and you know what a bother it was going to pillar to post." Do you remember they threw that very large party, lovely banquet? I don't know who was catering, but whoever it was all on the house. And whoever went there, they didn't put people off. And that's what we'll see in the Gemara. Let's have a look at the Gemara, please. Hahi Itzah. Here we are. There was a lady, Da'azmanuha ledina. Well, you wouldn't say Azman. What do we say? You probably say summoned. Yeah? There was a certain lady summoned to the Bezdin. Kamei de Amema. In front of Amema. It was the time of Rav Ashi, slightly before Rav Ashi. So quite one of the later Amoraim. And that was in Nahador. Ozal Amema Limchuza. Amema, as it happened, the main Rav, he'd been called, or I don't know called, he'd gone to Mechuzah, not that far away, but not in Nahador. And she said, Velo Ozla Basre. She said, I'm not going, not trying any further. You want the court case here? Now, she'd been called, she'd been summoned. So clearly she is the debtor. Sounds like it's a financial case, as we'll see in a minute. She's the debtor, and she said, no, you call me to the Bezdin. The Bezdin is meant to be residing here. It may well be that the top man, the top Dayan, the Amema, isn't there, but I'm not going. No, I'm staying here. Ozal Amema leMechuzah v'lo Ozla Basrei. She didn't follow. Kosav Pesicha Ilavo. What's a Pesicha? Well, have a look at Rashi. Ashtar Shamto. Whoa. Shamto is an excommunication. She's refusing. She refuses to budge. Meanwhile, the creditor wants his money back. And she said, no, I'm not going any further. I was called here and that's it. So she was put in, as we've seen here, this excommunication. Omalei Rav Ashi la Amema. Here we have Rav Ashi coming to Amema. V'hanan tanan, we've learned, our Mishnah tells us that they've made a ruling here. Things were getting perhaps slightly easier, but we've got a decree of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Afilu, beginning of the line, Afilu rosh bezdin b'chol makom. Shelo yehei ho'edim holchim ela lamakom avad. We've learned that there was a leniency of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai decree that even if the rosh bezdin, that was the time of the Mishnah, obviously moving on, it means even if your top dayan is not there, if you're summoned to the court, I go to the court, and that's good enough. I don't have to follow the top dayan wherever he is, in Nossi in the Mishnah. So Rav Ashi is challenging Amema and saying, why did you put her in, say, an excommunicator? The ruling is that you don't have to follow the top dayan, even if I assume that it was the creditor who wanted him wanted the case to be looked at by the top judge or the top Rav. And he said, no, we've got to move on to Amema. She said, no, I don't mind being judged right here, even with, say, lesser mortals, even without Amema. But the creditor was very keen that actually, no, it should follow the, I want to make sure that, in fact, we've got the right psak here, perhaps a complicated case. I do want Amema to be there. And she refused. He said, that's fine, says Rav Ashi to Amema. The ruling is, as long as she's gone to the Bezdin, it doesn't matter if the top man's not there. Says the Gemara, Omalei, Amema answered back and said, no. Hanun Mem? Any takers for Hanun Mem?
Honey
Beg pardon?
Millie?
Yes, Honey Millie, for people shouting Honey Millie. Thank you very much. Honey Millie, these words apply. When do these words apply? Li'inyan Eidos HaChodesh. It's talking about Eidos HaChodesh. You can't just extrapolate and say that the same rulings apply throughout. It was a special leniency because of Eidos HaChodesh. Why? De'im Kain. What's mean im Kain? Have a look at Rashi. De'im Kain. Im ato matrichon. If we give them the bother of having to go to see the Rosh Bezdin, in particular in this case of Eidos HaChodesh, where in fact there are psukim to say it is preferred and it should be the Rosh Bezdin there. If we insisted on that, nimtseis machshilon leosid lovai. What does it mean, machshilon leosid lovai? We're tripping them up on a future occasion. Yeah? Machshil, to trip up, a stumbling block. You're tripping them up for the future. They won't bother to come. And that's we're trying to minimize that possibility. And therefore we said you no longer have to follow the Rosh Bezdin. If he's not in town, it doesn't matter. Even if he's somewhere not that far away, you just go to wherever the Bezdin is sitting. But that's only in the case of Eidos HaChodesh. However, says the Gemara Abul Hocha here, and the Gemara brings a posuk for this, posuk coming from Mishlei. Be familiar with Mishlei. Says the posuk, Eved loive leish malve. What does that mean? Eved loive, it's the other way around. A loive is an eved to the malve. In other words, if the creditor insists on something and he wants it to be judged by the top man, then I'm afraid the loiva has to listen to him. And that's really what we've got here. So it says Amema, you're right. What I paskened and putting in excommunicating her is because the ruling is that, yes, if that's what the creditor insists upon, then really that's what has to take place. The upper hand is with that creditor. So that's the end. And then the Gemara now goes on, but meanwhile we'll have a look at something else.
This excommunication, was that the only method available to the Beis Din to force somebody to do something? What
you mean they could have given away some other...
What powers does the Beis Din have to force somebody to do something?
Well, they could have made a financial penalty. But I mean, if you want to get a point across, you excommunicate her until she's prepared to give in.
It's interesting what powers they have. There's no police force or prison.
No, you mean, could they round her up and...
Contempt of court. I mean, here she'd be in contempt of court. And
court, yes.
It could be an imprisonable offence if she didn't obey, but it seems that...
Yeah, but they would have had the powers to put her into prison. I mean, we're talking here of the, late Amoraim. Would they put her into prison? Probably not, but that would certainly be a power they could do, excommunicate her. Hopefully she, changed her mind, and eventually that was rescinded. But no, you're quite right. It just shows the power of the Beis Din and the power of the Rabbanim, power of Ramema, to be able to do that. And that is a power that is used even today under certain circumstances.
I've seen a flyer. I'm sure, I think it was on the from the Beis Din about some character who they were Manada or Manur.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Yeah, not
And
that
it
long
was
ago.
it was on the doors of the shores. It must have been.
Yeah, absolutely. This person refused to give a get to his wife.
Yeah, and
he was demanding a huge sum, and he refused to give her a get. And you're absolutely right. They could still use that today. He shouldn't be part of the minyan or certainly aliyahs, and do what they can to try and to force him to back down. So they could do that. And you're right. There was this fellow we know that it happened to.
I think the Gemara is quite careful in its language, because they said she didn't go there. She didn't follow. It wasn't that she didn't want to go to different courts. She just couldn't be bothered. Right?
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
She was uneasy about litigation. They just sort of ran away and used it as an excuse. That seems to be what the Gemara is saying.
Yeah, you're right. She said, "I'm prepared to have a lesser dying past than this," and the creditor said, "No, I want the top man." And what we're saying here is that is the case. He's got the upper hand. You're right, but she was just like coming down and say, I can't be bothered to go. Well, you can't do that. That's called, as we say, court. You've got if you're called and you're called to, and the creditor wants me to be there, the Amema said, then you have to do that. Okay. The next bit is a bit longer and can't really do justice to it. So meanwhile, let's go back to, I know you've got some other bits and pieces there, but I was thinking actually, something else I wanted to mention. I know perhaps we'll mention something from the Mishnah. Those people are learning the Mishnahs, for our good friends. The first Mishnah of the last parak of Psachim, which is what we're doing. The last Mishnah talks about Seder nights. The whole parak is all about Seder, beautiful parak. And yesterday's Mishnah tells us about even Oni, Afilo Oni Shabi Yisrael Lo Yochel Ad She Yosev, making sure that the Gaboim, that's what we can talk about, collections that are made to ensure that everyone has sufficient, talking about matzahs, and in particular, make sure that even he gets his 4 cups of wine. So that's up to them to ensure that they're, mois of Pesach, it's called, to ensure that he gets his 4 cups of wine. And as we know, the 4 cups of wine, several reasons given why they're 4 cups of wine. The one perhaps we know, Rashi and the Rashba mentioned it on that Gemara there. Just a minute, thank you. Is because of the 4 words that are used in Parshas Va'era when it's talking about leaving Mitzrayim. V'otseisi, take you out, v'otseisi, v'yitzalti, v'go'alti, v'lokachti. 4 words, 4 verbs are used in the Exodus of Mitzrayim. And lots of interpretations. What exactly are those 4? Rabbeinu Bachai mentions that the 4 refer to 4 stages. One of the stages we saw in the Gemara, in Daf, if you've got a Gemara, if you haven't, it doesn't matter, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, where it says in Rosh Hashanah, Botla Avoda Me'avuseinu B'Mitzrayim. Daf Yud Aleph, go back some while. The first word, that verb, I will take you out, mitachas sivlos, the burden, the work, the labor of Mitzrayim. Explains Rabbeinu Bachai, and this Gemara, we've got it here. Yes, the makkos were taking place, the plagues, but at Rosh Hashanah, that means the 1st of Tishri, obviously 6 months prior to the actual Yetzias Mitzrayim, the labor stopped. That's Voitseisi, the first cup. Yeah? That's 6 months. Obviously, there are quite a few plagues still to go. That's the first stage. Voitseisi Tzalti means, yes, taking you out, saving you from Mitzrayim itself, leaving Mitzrayim on Pesach itself. That's number 2. Voitseisi Vitzalti. V'goalti, the real Geula, redemption, is when you know the enemy is no longer there. And that happened at Kriyas Yamsuf. That's the third. And leading ultimately to Velokachti, I take you, Lokachti li la'om, Voyisi le'lokim, with finally the stage of Matan Torah, which comes, of course, Shavuos time. So those are the 4 cups of wine. One of the reasons, I say the Rishalmi gives several other reasons why we're having 4 cups of wine, but that perhaps is arguably the most well-known. There are 4 stages in this Voitseisi, Vitzalti, V'goalti, V'lokachti. And I say, based on that Gemara there that we've seen, Daf Yud Aleph in Rosh Hashanah, and that, I say that was in Rosh Hashanah time. Daf Yud Aleph, Omad Aleph. The question is this: why do you really need that first stage? Let's go straight to it. I mean, and if perhaps it should be longer, shorter, but why do you need that first stage? It's true, they needed to prepare, they've got to get the Korban Pesach ready, etc. So, yeah, you could say tools down, maybe Rosh Chodesh, or if you want Rosh Chodesh Nisan 2 weeks before, if you want a month before maybe to prepare. But why do you need 6 months of no labor? I mean, of course, anybody under the hard labor would prefer any day off, obviously. So the shorter, the better. But it seems to be it's a particular stage, a stage of no further labor, which lasts for 6 months. And it's not just to prepare for Pesach, because for that you don't need 6 months. They haven't even been told that they're going to bring the Korban Pesach. That's only on Rosh Chodesh. Why do you need such a long gap? Not just the gap, but why do you need that at all? Why couldn't you just at Rosh Chodesh say, yes, that's when the labor ceased. Now you're preparing for the Korban Pesach. Why is there a separate stage called the Voitseisi? And I heard a few years ago from Reb Shlomo Brevda Zatzal. I remember him, he actually said this to me on the phone. He was in hospital shortly before he passed away, actually. And he asked me that question. And he suggested the following. He suggested that this stage was not just downing tools, as it were. It was an Nisayon. It was a test. What type of test was this? That's what he said to me from the hospital bed. It was a test to see, now that there's no labor, there's no hard work, there's no burden, what are people doing? What are people doing? Are they down tools and now it's golf and that's it? Or are people doing other things? They are concerned one with the other, helping each other, ben odom lachavero, or ben odom lamokum as well. There was still the Leviim there. They were trying to learn and understand. After all, we've had the 210 years of labor, where presumably there wasn't that much time to spend on spiritual matters. Were they involved? Were they interested in other things now that they have more time on their hands? That was the test of those 6 months, to see what do people do when they have that extra time. Fascinating answer. And he said to me, that is going to be the final nisayon before we get to the ultimate redemption. People will have more time on their hand. Now we know we're in the technologically, and you can be asked and have to reply immediately with emails, etc. But overall, people do have more time. there's time, whether we're in retirement or semi-retirement or just more time on their hands to be able to plan their day accordingly, working from home or whatever. What are people doing with that extra time? Are they just, I shouldn't say just wasting the time away, and yeah, everybody needs a break and everybody needs some exercise and everybody needs a holiday. Yeah, absolutely. But are they using some of that time furthering their knowledge, taking on certain chesed opportunities, helping others, whatever they're doing? What are people doing with extra time? Are they utilizing at least some of it in a very positive way? Studying, learning, as I say, chesed opportunities, no end to those. And that will be the final test, if you like. What are people doing? Or negatively, there are plenty of things on the negative side one can do once you've got extra time on your hands. So that very powerful message. And as I say, I know we had some other things to pick up, but I think a very important message that, as we go into the Seder, yes, it's a time of simcha and a time of rejoicing, and it's Yom Tov, and yes, we're now a people, Klal Yisrael, having left Mitzrayim, etc., and we said ultimately leading to Lakachti. But to bear in mind, yes, if we're meant to be free people to do what? And I think there may be, everybody in their own particular level, to picking up, doing things, maybe time to think about opportunities that one might want to do, because maybe that's a very powerful lesson that we can take. Particularly talking about the first cup of wine, which is the Hotsesi, the freedom, people having whatever time they have got, utilizing it well, because not only having seen that in Mitzrayim, and that was, I say, the first stage of the Exodus, if we can try and follow suit and utilize what we can, trying to do some extras with the time, that hopefully we can look forward not just to this wonderful Yom Tov, but as we go, hopefully Mechael El Choel, Shalom Al Yisrael, and I'm not going to go down that avenue now. There should be peace of the whole of Klal Yisrael with a bit of Achdus. That would be wonderful too. Let's hope that we can take all those messages and on a more, I say, personal things that we can do in any particular way to try and move onwards and upwards. And let me just conclude with one further halacha, which we've mentioned before, in Hilchos Yom Tov. As we know, when it comes to Yom Tov, particularly Seder night, the ladies, same as the men, it applies to them as much. The 4 cups of wine applies to them. All the halachas of Seder night apply to them, where normally ladies are exempt if it's a positive mitzvah, which is time bound, but they're not when it comes to Seder night. It's all part and parcel of the Yom Tov. But a very interesting halacha that we mustn't forget as we look right at the end of Hilchos Yom Tov, Siman 529, which talks there about Chayav Odom Nir Someach. Yes, obliged to be Someach, if you can, on Yom Tov. And he talks there about not just the individual, the man, if you like, of the house. Make sure the ladies are also besimcha, which means, and he actually lists it for us here. He says for ladies, make sure, yes, he says, begodim betachshitin, depending on the wherewithal, the capacity, begodim and tachshitin, whether it applies to a wife, or it could be a mother maybe, etc., to make sure that the ladies are also in a state of enjoying. No, I haven't been pushed by the ladies here to say this tonight, but no, it's very important to make sure that we're all In this frame, it talks about the children as well. But yes, the begodim and tachshitim, we're talking about the jewelry, clothes, something to make them besimcha as much as the men, to ensure that, say, everybody should enjoy the Yom Tov together. Wonderful halacha, the last simon, the last chapter of Hilchos Yom Tov in the Shulchan Aruch. So with that, gentlemen, wish you all well. Have a very good Yom Tov. So we won't be meeting for a couple of weeks, but hopefully after that we'll be back on track in Hashem. As we move into the summer months, we should all be well. Have a very good Yom Tov, one and all.
Good Yom
Wherever,
Tov.
wherever,
Yom Tov.
whatever
You too,
location.
You know, in it.